In late September of 2024, the courtroom fell silent as 14-year-old Carly Madison Greg stood before the judge. The girl who once passed through familiar school hallways where her mother taught was about to hear a sentence that would define the rest of her life. What was handed down that day was not merely punishment, but the beginning of a reality many believe is more severe than death itself. When the cameras stopped and the courtroom emptied, Carly vanished into a system never designed for children, a system built to confine the most serious adult offenders. Yet public attention did not fade. The world kept watching. She was sentenced to 2 life terms without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 10 years for tampering with evidence. The message from the bench was unmistakable. Carly Gregg would die in prison. The contradiction was impossible to ignore. How does a society reconcile childhood with a sentence that assumes a lifetime of unchanging guilt? Can a 14-year-old truly comprehend what it means to never grow old outside concrete walls? Moments before the gavel fell, she was legally a child with years of possibility ahead of her. Moments after, she became the youngest person in the state condemned to permanent confinement. Some argue that a death sentence would have been the harsher outcome, that a finite end is more fitting for an irreversible crime. Others insist that life without parole is the true punishment, a slow erosion of hope where time loses meaning and days repeat without mercy. Childhood does not simply end, it is sealed inside a cell. And by the end of this video, you will understand why Carly Gregg's life behind bars may represent a fate more enduring and more severe than any execution. Before you decide where you stand, within hours of sentencing, a process already outlined by policy moved forward without hesitation. The ruling did not mark an ending, but a transfer of authority. Carly was removed from the juvenile system that had once framed her as a minor and placed under the control of the Mississippi Department of Corrections. The transition carried no ceremony. Staff completed intake documentation, recorded her physical condition, and prepared her for transport with the same procedural neutrality applied to any person beginning a life sentence. Age did not alter the checklist. The shift signaled a fundamental change. Her status no longer reflected childhood or rehabilitation. She was now an inmate serving life without parole. The transport vehicle arrived and the doors opened not for a teenager, but for an individual whose future had already been resolved. Hand restraints were secured. Personal items were cataloged. Records were finalized. Each step followed protocol designed to eliminate emotion from the moment. The process did not pause to reflect on youth, context, or potential. The system functions on uniformity. Individual circumstances do not interrupt its rhythm. Upon arrival at the state intake facility, Carly entered an environment structured primarily for adults convicted of violent crimes. Classification officers followed standardized assessment procedures. She was photographed, fingerprinted, medically screened, and evaluated for security placement. Specialists reviewed her age, mental health background, and conviction details to determine housing. Policy guided every decision. Incarceration does not adapt to the individual. The individual adapts to incarceration. This transition marked the final removal of childhood routines, replacing them with schedules designed for containment and control. Beneath these administrative steps lies an unresolved question. Should a minor follow the same correctional pathway as adults who spent years cultivating violent behavior? Or does uniform enforcement erase distinctions that matter when accountability becomes irreversible punishment? Long before a judge imposed a sentence, Carly's life reflected instability that preceded the crime. She attended the same high school where her mother worked as an educator, navigating familiar corridors while experiencing internal conflict few noticed. Teachers observed shifts in mood and engagement. Classmates described emotional distance. At home, tensions escalated. Her mother attempted to manage discipline while addressing growing concern for her daughter's behavior. Conflicts intensified as adolescence amplified every disagreement. The discovery of cannabis products, vaping devices, and hidden phones deepened mistrust. These incidents were not isolated. They formed a pattern suggesting secrecy and defiance. Mental health concerns grew more prominent. Carly reported depressive symptoms, emotional volatility, and hallucinations during childhood and early adolescence. Treatment included prescribed medications and adjustments that introduced instability rather than resolution. Each change carried side effects debated later in court. The instability itself compounded stress within the household. School discipline issues added pressure. An incident involving a pocket knife resulted in administrative action and a change in educational placement. While handled within school policy, it reinforced perceptions that her behavior was escalating. Disagreements became routine. Conflicts over boundaries, technology, and accountability created cycles neither parent nor child knew how to interrupt. By the months leading up to the crime, their relationship had fractured under emotional distance and untreated distress. These factors did not excuse what occurred. They formed the environment where escalation took root. They raise an unavoidable question. Could intervention have altered the trajectory before it reached collapse? By the morning of March 19th, nothing outward suggested an irreversible break. Carly attended school, moving through classes with a subdued demeanor. Teachers noted quiet withdrawal but no disruption. When school ended, she returned home with her mother to a quiet residential neighborhood. Inside the house, routine should have resumed. Instead, surveillance footage revealed a departure from normalcy. After entering, Carly moved deliberately through rooms. Cameras captured portions of her movements. She entered her parents' bedroom where a firearm was concealed beneath the mattress. Her mother remained unaware elsewhere in the house. The footage showed Carly exiting with hands positioned behind her back. Investigators later identified this posture as consistent with concealing a weapon. She navigated hallways carefully, avoiding camera exposure when possible. Though incomplete, the footage allowed reconstruction of events. Moments later, audio recorded 3 gunshots in rapid succession, followed by silence. These fragments became critical evidence. The footage could not show the violence, but it preserved the sounds of its occurrence. Observers continue to debate whether the actions reflected emotional collapse or gradual escalation. The fragments leave space for interpretation. Within them lies the unsettling possibility that intent and impulse merged in the hours before the attack. When the gunfire ceased, the home entered an unnatural stillness. The surveillance system preserved sound but not sight, capturing only echoes of what had unfolded. What followed offered investigators insight into Carly's behavior after the shooting. Rather than fleeing or seeking help, she initiated actions later cited as evidence of awareness. She retrieved her mother's phone and sent a message to her stepfather, mimicking her mother's tone. The message was unremarkable in isolation. In context, it revealed an attempt to control what would happen next. She also contacted a friend, requesting they come to the house. Surveillance footage later confirmed the friend's arrival. Authorities testified that Carly led the visitor to her mother's body. The friend fled in shock. Afterward, Carly altered the digital environment. Investigators discovered an interior camera removed from its mount and placed inside a refrigerator. This act was interpreted as an attempt to interfere with evidence. She remained in the home with her mother's body, knowing her stepfather would return. Court testimony established she armed herself again. Experts disagreed on the motivation. Some argued her mental state distorted reality. Others cited the sequence as evidence of calculation. Within less than an hour, Carly moved from the initial shooting to attempting to influence the aftermath. The boundary between panic and intent blurred. When her stepfather arrived, the situation escalated again. He encountered the scene and was shot in the shoulder during a struggle. Despite injury, he disarmed Carly. She fled on foot through neighboring yards. Law enforcement responded rapidly.
Vehicles Converge.
A helicopter deployed thermal imaging. Officers located and apprehended her without further incident. She was transported to juvenile detention. From the moment of arrest, legal proceedings advanced quickly. Prosecutors charged her as an adult, citing severity and evidence. Mississippi law permits transfer under specific conditions. The judge approved the move. Carly became an adult defendant. A plea agreement offering approximately 40 years was extended. It would have allowed release in middle adulthood. She rejected it and chose trial. Media attention intensified. Proceedings remained public despite defense requests for closure. Prosecutors presented surveillance evidence and timelines. Defense attorneys introduced psychiatric evaluations detailing depression, dissociation, and hallucinations. Experts debated cognitive development and medication effects. Central to deliberation was a fundamental question. How should adolescent cognition be weighed when life without parole is possible? Neuroscience acknowledges differences between adolescent and adult brains. The courtroom demanded a binary conclusion. The jury deliberated briefly. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing followed. The jury imposed 2 life sentences without parole plus 10 years for evidence tampering. The district attorney described the crime in stark terms. Reactions polarized. Supporters viewed the sentence as necessary. Critics argued it ignored psychological complexity. By rejecting the plea, Carly exchanged decades for permanence.
No parole.
No reconsideration. She was transferred to the Central Mississippi Correctional Facility and placed in the Youthful Offender Unit. The unit operates separately from adult population, designed to protect minors serving extreme sentences. Movement is restricted. Programming occurs within secured spaces. Despite safeguards, the sentence remains unchanged. Her confinement spans childhood, adulthood, and old age. Life inside the Youthful Offender Unit follows rigid structure. Each day begins with head counts and supervised movement. Academic instruction occurs within the unit. Mental health counseling is mandatory. Recreation is limited. Contact with adult inmates is prohibited. The environment prioritizes safety, but isolation defines daily existence. Peers are other youths convicted of serious crimes, many serving long or life sentences. There are no pathways toward early release. Long-term confinement during adolescence carries psychological consequences. Research shows developmental stagnation when natural milestones disappear. Depression and hopelessness are common. Therapy manages symptoms but cannot restore opportunity. Institutionalization reshapes identity. Authority replaces autonomy. Choice diminishes. For someone entering at 14, identity forms within confinement. Awareness of permanence shapes perception of time. Days repeat. Years accumulate without progress markers.
No parole hearings.
No reentry planning. The sentence stretches endlessly. Some argue this form of punishment exceeds capital punishment in severity because it never concludes. Psychological strain compounds rather than ends. Public attention continues. Media revisits the case. Online debates persist. Advocacy groups raise funds for appeals. Legal challenges cite constitutional concerns and Supreme Court precedent requiring consideration of youth. Outcomes remain uncertain. The comparison between life without parole and death penalty reveals divergence in duration rather than severity. One ends. The other persists. For juvenile offenders, permanence alters development permanently. The debate extends beyond this case. It questions how society defines justice when youth commits irreversible harm. Carly's future unfolds entirely within institutional walls. Childhood ended not with maturity, but with confinement. The sentence ensures accountability while eliminating redemption. Whether this represents justice or tragedy remains unresolved. The question endures because the punishment itself does not fade. Continues. And so we return to the question that cannot be avoided. Is a lifetime of confinement that begins at 14 years old a punishment more severe than death itself? After tracing the full path of this case, one reality becomes clear. This is not a question the legal system can answer on its own. It is a moral reckoning that extends far beyond courtrooms and verdicts. A child committed an act that cannot be undone, taking one life and permanently altering another. In response, the state imposed the most extreme sentence available, ensuring that her future would exist entirely behind prison walls. Between these two facts exists a space filled with grief, anger, fear, and uncertainty. Some will argue that the sentence was justified, that accountability must match the gravity of the harm, regardless of age. Others will see a young person condemned before adulthood, placed into a system that offers no opportunity for growth, forgiveness, or change. Perhaps the reality lies somewhere between these perspectives, shaped by how each of us defines justice, responsibility, and mercy. These questions have no simple answers, only deeply personal ones. So now, the conversation turns to you. Do you believe this sentence represents justice, tragedy, or something far more complex? Should a 14-year-old ever be sentenced to die in prison, or should the possibility of redemption always exist for someone so young? Share your perspective in the comments below. And if you want more in-depth examinations of cases that challenge how we understand punishment and justice, consider subscribing. Thank you for watching. Stay informed, stay thoughtful, and join us next time as we continue exploring the stories that force us to question what justice truly means.